Alright, let's do this one last time. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has been many things. My obsession as a 12-year-old, a worldwide phenomenon.
Hi, Marvel fans.
And now a franchise at a distinct turning point. After years of decline in popularity, the MCU is barreling towards a new pair of films that will likely decide if they're gonna keep pushing forward or if they're done for good. After the last couple of movies though, I hate to admit it, I am back on board to some extent. Even if I'm not as into these movies anymore, these movies have been a big part of my life, and now that we're seemingly towards the end of this directionless phase, coming up to a big movie event again, it has me a little excited. So in the build-up to Avengers Doomsday, over the next year, I'll be going through all the MCU movies up to this point with my newfound 2025 perspective. Because the last time I went through every MCU movie was 5 years ago. So I'd say this is as good a time as any to look back on these films with a bit of hindsight, and take stock of how we got here. So today we're starting at the beginning, obviously with Phase 1, and Phase 1 starts with 2008's Iron Man. Man, watching this in 2025 was a breath of fresh air in a lot of different ways. The main one being just how much this feels like a movie compared to MCU movies now. And I know that's a cliche to say, but just in every way, visually, the images just feel like they have weight to them. Like real people were making this, as opposed to these new movies that feel like they were made inside that CGI world that the Lion King remake was filmed in. And the characters and the pacing and the dialogue, it all feels like a normal fun movie that any normal fun person could watch. This movie's hilarious. There were so many bits that genuinely made me laugh. Obviously, Robert Downey Jr. is a goated casting choice, basically playing himself, but all the supporting cast are great and don't have that isn't it embarrassing I'm here just doing this for the paycheck type vibe that performances from big actors later on in the MCU have. Like Jeff Bridges is genuinely really good in this. For the first 2/3 especially, we'll get to that. Tony's chemistry with Pepper is believable and funny. These feel like two real people who can match wits and like each other, not two people who like each other because the script says so. And that's also because Tony Stark is given room in this movie to be an asshole. That's another part of the breath of fresh air aspect of this. It has a little edge to it. And no, I'm not about to hit you with the movies are woke now spiel. Wouldn't that be funny if I just became a grifter out of nowhere? But I feel like these movies are so scared now to do anything that might not vibe with literally everyone. So all these characters are so bland now, they all have the same personality, even the edgy ones in new movies are not that interesting. Tony Stark's assholery makes his subsequent redemption interesting to follow. And also he's able to make these lines funny and the character not hateable because RDJ is charming. And in other ways too, like in terms of the story and setting up stakes, MCU movies have become so ridiculously sanitized and corporate that again, they feel like they were made in a void. They're as edgy as a goddamn dodgeball. And so in this film, to see some real shit going down, by MCU standards, is pretty cool. The first 40 minutes are not at all appropriate for kids. I remember being freaked out when I first watched this. And that's a good thing, because it actually establishes stakes. Tony Stark is kidnapped by terrorists who torture him and threaten to torture his friend. Like, it's fucked up. It's supposed to be. Bro, this looks like a real terrorist video. Like, seeing this in an MCU movie now is kinda nuts. And again, on the character arc, nowadays the arcs that these characters have are pretty minuscule, at least compared to this movie. Like here, he is a warmongering douchebag. He's a bad person who sells weapons and doesn't care about the death or destruction he's profiting off of. And yeah, having a main character in a superhero film start at that point could be seen as kind of a risk. At least nowadays, I feel like that'd be considered a risk, because the audience might not like him. But it's a crucial part of the storytelling, of him then becoming the hero. And hey, themes of selling weapons and not considering who they might kill could be making some kind of comment on the military-industrial complex, which is again something that I don't know, something like Captain America 4 would not even dream of doing. That movie was allergic to saying anything about anything. Now, to be fair, how many of those ideas are actually realized or properly expanded upon here is a slightly different point. Like, Tony Stark realizes selling weapons is bad, and so you'd think he'd maybe make the arc reactor tech available worldwide, or use his genius to feed the homeless or something, but instead he makes himself a really cool weapon that he can then personally use to kill people with. Bad people, but you know, still. I guess everyone's just gotta trust he can make that judgment now. But hey, to be fair, that does come up in later films, and mostly I just appreciate that there's something of a character arc here, and there are some slightly relevant to the real world ideas here. The movie's also just, like, very cool. This is the kind of superhero movie that helped transform superheroes from a thing liked by nerds whose lunch money you take to something genuinely badass. The suit, the rock music, RDJ, it's just a cool-ass movie. Now, as a movie, it isn't perfect. I remember when I was first getting into making superhero YouTube videos, everyone's complaint with this film was that the last bit is rushed and stupid, and I remember thinking, I don't know, that fight scene's pretty cool. And going back to the film now, the fight scene is pretty cool, but the problem is more that the movie definitely becomes more goofy superhero movie feeling in that last third than the rest of it. The rest of it is a genuinely charming comedy movie, and again, it's cool, like it's aware of cliches, and these characters are witty, and then at the end you start getting scenes like Pepper discovering the massive I am the villain pile of evidence on Obadiah's computer, and Obadiah, instead of being cool Jeff Bridges doing shady stuff in the background, writing segues with a cigar, fucking crazy, by the way. He just starts telling everyone his plan, like he's from a Saturday morning cartoon. Like, it's a shame I have to murder you, Tony Stark, as I am the villain, and also I will kill your girlfriend. So yeah, that stuff does feel slightly detached from the rest of the film. It kind of turns into a movie that feels like the characters in the first part of the movie would make fun of, but then it goes right back to what it was earlier with that final scene. The setups for this universe are also not super subtle, but they're kind of fun. I mean, as a regular person watching this in 2008, you might be thinking, why do we keep cutting back to this S.H.I.E.L.D. guy? Like, that is kind of random. But it works in the film's story, it's not overly distracting. And I don't know, maybe it's just watching it back, but there is something cool about this universe being set up like this before it was anything. Getting Sam Jackson in. As we'll talk about later, I remember the hype going into the cinema for the first Avengers movie, and seeing the groundwork being laid for that here, it's kind of neat. There's not all that much else to say, really. Iron Man is a banger movie. It's exciting and funny and cool, and beyond actually kicking off the MCU, like I said before, I think it was a big factor in superhero movies becoming not lame and mainstream again, especially in that 2000s period where they were in a bit of a lull. Even independent of what it kicked off, it remains as one of the best superhero movies ever made. We then come to The Incredible Hulk, which is certainly one of the superhero movies ever made. I will say, while I don't want to just exclusively reference present-day MCU here, there is an interesting perspective here, where you can compare and look back and all that. And I have to say, the last few years of Marvel movies and what these feel like now does certainly cast some of these earlier mid-films in a better light. Like, yeah, this movie is not that interesting, but at least it didn't give me a headache, you know? That being said, though, you're not getting off that easy, Incredible Hulk. This movie's still pretty boring. It's just as standard superhero movie as it gets. The story's okay, the action's okay, it's shot okay, there isn't that much interesting to Bruce Banner as a character here, which is sort of baffling, because he could be such an interesting character. That's what bugs me about these Hulk movies. I feel like we've gotten teases of what you could do with this character, but just never the full thing. A guy who's controlled by this monster to the point that it turns him suicidal, having to keep his temper at all times and all this stuff. This could be super dark in a very interesting way. But in this, he's just a generic guy. In the 2003 Hulk movie, they get into the emotions a bit more, but also there it's just boring and stupid father-son stuff, and not as much about the Jekyll and Hyde coolness that you could explore with this character. And the monster of Hulk itself, I would love to see a little bit more of a horror angle on that. The first Hulk scene here with the soldiers in Brazil, you get a little taste of that, you get a little bit of it in the Avengers, but like, that could be how you make Hulk interesting. Make him scary. But no, here we can only briefly touch on anything slightly stylish or out of the ordinary, so we can get back to generic punching and whatnot. Also, on the Hulk stuff, and comparing it to 2003 Hulk, say what you want about that movie, I don't think it's very good, but if you're a Hulk fan, you get a lot of Hulk stuff from it. You get him fighting tanks, and fighting giant dogs, and punching them in the balls, by the way, that's crazy, and leaping over deserts, and all kinds of cool Hulk shit. Here, he has the university fight with the military, which is fine, but nothing too crazy, and the final fight where he fights a villain that is him, but a slightly different color, which is also fine, but it's a lot of smoke and fire and gray backdrops and whatnot, like most generic comic book movie endings. Like, if you're not gonna do dark horror Hulk, then have him do some more interesting types of smashing things, I guess. The love story is also super generic and not fleshed out at all, like as opposed to Iron Man where they have this chemistry and you see their relationship grow and it's cute and fun. Here, you're just told these two love each other and that's supposed to keep you invested in the romance scenes. Like, it's really just nothing. They literally meet in the pouring rain and reunite and kiss, and it feels like a AMC turn off your phone ad. I feel like I've been kind of harsh here. It's not a film without any merit. I think Ed Norton is totally okay in the role. I like the opening bit being in the favelas. That's a setting we haven't really seen in a superhero film, and it's a cool place to put a character like the Hulk. A place with seemingly lots of chaos and craziness that he actually finds peace in for a time. That's interesting. It has its kind of funny moments, though some of them are a bit hacky. And the CGI is pretty good. The fact that the main centerpiece fight is all in broad daylight, and the Hulk looks pretty great in it still is commendable. Honestly, it might look better than some present-day Hulk CGI. Maybe it's because it feels more real, because it's in a more real feeling / looking movie, and isn't just around a bunch of CGI characters and CGI backgrounds. I don't know. Weirdly, to me, the CGI looks way worse in the rain scene, even though it's darker, but there's something about this wet texture that just makes it not look real. I will also say, and I'm sure this has been pointed out before, this Hulk does not really look like Ed Norton, like, at all. Like, the Banner and Ruffalo Hulks clearly look like them. This just looks like a basic Hulk model not based on any actor. But anyway, it's not that deep. So yeah, Incredible Hulk is not a movie I'm gonna have some epic change of opinion on. I'm pretty sure this is how I felt about this movie when I saw it as an 11-year-old. It's okay, cool moments here and there. It's not offensively bad, it's just not anything. Put it like this, for the longest time, this would be the MCU's most skippable movie. Then after this, we got what at the time and for years after was perceived as another stumble out the gate for the MCU, but in hindsight, not at all really. Iron Man 2. I made a video some years ago talking about how this movie is overhated, and I absolutely stand by that. When I was coming up in the superhero movie YouTube game, there were online opinions that as a new person to the community or scene, you just internalized. Batman and Robin and Spider-Man 3 are the worst. Look at the Bat credit card and the dancing, isn't that embarrassing? The Nolan Batman movies are peak and everyone's referencing them. You know, the type of takes and jokes from those old hizzy videos and honest trailers. And one of these takes that everyone had was that Iron Man 2 was bad because all it did was set up the Avengers. Looking back, yeah, that's a problem with it, but A, it is absolutely nothing compared to how bad this type of thing would get later on, and B, the rest of that movie is kind of awesome. It's not as good as the first, it is kind of bloated and stupid at times, but it's very funny, it's got lots of cool action, it's a super watchable blockbuster. I watched this multiple times with my family and everyone loved it. I would never be able to watch what's considered a bad MCU movie in the modern day in that way. And honestly, I know this is kind of cheating, but I don't really care about some of these problems that people bring up. Like one complaint is that Tony Stark learns a lesson in the first film, he's humbled and becomes less of an asshole, and in this we basically revert to square one where he's an asshole again. But in the grand scheme of Tony Stark's character, I kind of think that makes sense, and also it's like sort of funny. Like with this fucking guy, it honestly tracks that after 5 minutes of being like, dang, I gotta be a hero and be nicer to Pepper and rethink my life, he'd go back to being a douchebag like immediately. Also, another complaint that I would turn into a bit of a positive. Even though the actual logic of this secret element in his dad's expo map or whatever is confusing and doesn't really make much sense when you think about it, I actually quite like the father element that they add to Tony Stark's character here. And yeah, Whiplash isn't the best superhero villain ever, but Mickey Rourke is kind of memorable with his gruff performance and his bird, and the whips are pretty visceral. Like again, considering what you get later as far as villains go, this is pretty decent. And also you got a secondary villain in Sam Rockwell's Justin Hammer who is the best part of the movie, and who manages to somehow outsmarm Tony Stark in a really funny way. Don Cheadle works perfectly well as a replacement for Terrence Howard, and he would go on to be a fun part of this universe. Yeah, maybe Sam Jackson and Scarlett Johansson being in this as much as they are overcrowded a bit, and it ends up being a bit setup-y, but they are still integrated into the larger story. They're not just a totally detached side plot, and they're great casting choices, and they have fun scenes like the donut shop bit or the Black Widow action scene. Like really, a lot of the problems with this film, I just think we didn't know how good we had it when that's the stuff we were complaining about back then. There are tons of memorable scenes in here. The Senate scene, the racetrack scene. I don't care, man. I think the party scene's hilarious. Again, this is 100% something this guy would do. And again, it gives the movie more personality. This has so much more personality than what we get now. It doesn't feel disposable. And there are slightly more adult, snarky jokes and little improv feeling, idiosyncratic funny moments. They make it feel like real people made this. Also, the suit looks unbelievable. Come on, the suitcase armor is so badass. This suit from 2010 looks so much better than the nanotech stuff does now. And again, just feels like it has weight to it, with that sound design as well. I feel like I'm talking myself into crowning this the best MCU movie or something. Like yes, of course it does have problems, I'm not saying it doesn't. And it falls into a lot of superhero cliches. And the final battle with Big Suit Whiplash isn't very interesting. But honestly, this is high-key a banger MCU movie. I'm conscious of not falling into the trap of, well, all the movies I watched when I was 12 are great, and the new ones suck. But I really do think this movie is kind of great. It's funny, it's exciting, it has personality. It's not as good as the first, but I would say it's a pretty great time. After this, we got 2011's Thor, which was the MCU's first big step into taking on more objectively silly, out there properties, and seeing if they could turn them into something that appealed to the mainstream. And I gotta say, I think they did a pretty good job here. I don't think Thor is the most interesting MCU movie, far from it, but with that goal in mind of making this goofy-ass comic book character palatable, I think it's good. It is very early MCU in that it's testing the waters of silly comic book stuff, while still definitely grounding it in the real world, in quips, in fish out of water jokes. But as far as easing the audience into more fantasy stuff goes, that's a smart way of doing it. If this whole movie was either Thor, Love and Thunder, nonsense sci-fi gibberish, or the Asgard Shakespearean angle that Kenneth Branagh took, it would not have been nearly as successful. But mixing the Shakespeare Asgard stuff, which I actually think is a great style for this world, and who better to do it than Branagh, with the funny New Mexico stuff, makes for a pretty charming little blockbuster. Sure, you can complain about the MCU-ish humor of it all, but that wasn't as played out back then, and I think the stuff on Earth is pretty fun. I like Skarsgård and Portman, and this is before the character of Jane Darcy got kind of annoying, and we get more Phil Coulson, which is fun. Phil Coulson, my goat. However, it does lean a little more Incredible Hulk on the generico-meter when it's focusing on the actual story, when it's not doing the jokes. Arrogant hero is cast out, learns some humility, comes back to take revenge and serve justice. It's not a groundbreaking story, you know exactly where it's gonna go, but honestly, most superhero movies have pretty generic stories. What makes them stand out is the flavor around that story. And as flavor goes, this isn't that bad. Beyond that Shakespeare vibe of Asgard, I also like the visuals of it. Again, I think you could argue a lot of the CGI is better than what we get today. This movie definitely looks better than the Waititi movies, I'll certainly give it that. The cast in Asgard is also pretty crazy looking back. Hiddleston as Loki is close to RDJ levels of goated casting. Honestly, in this movie, he doesn't even really get to flex his acting muscles that much, of being super villainous and mischievous like he does later. But he's still good. Hopkins as Odin is perfect casting as well. Hemsworth isn't getting a ton to do yet, but he does well with the stoic hero moments along with the comedic bits where he's more the butt of the joke. The action's okay, there are individual shots in here that are memorable, but as a whole you're not really coming back to this for the action. It's a pretty solid movie, I like it. I think overall this was one of the better ways to start making these films a bit more fantastical. And while it's not a movie I'd actively seek out to watch again, it's not one where I would crash out if someone suggested watching it. Then also in 2011, we had the first Captain America film, Captain America: The First Avenger. Now this is a film I'm absolutely going to have some kind of nostalgic bias for. I generally remember this as the first MCU movie I saw in the cinema, though I'm not totally sure about that, but I definitely saw it in some capacity before the Avengers, because I went into the Avengers a big Captain America fan. This movie was just 100% made for me. As a kid, I was kind of skinny, so seeing a guy go from skinny to hunk was very cool, part of why I also loved Hercules so much. B, super patriotic, back when being overtly super pro-America and covered in American flag memorabilia was more wholesome than sinister. And C, a massive fan of the Indiana Jones films. So this not only being set in that same time period and having the same villains, but emulating that adventure serial style was awesome. Also, especially as a kid, but still now, I loved a very genuine, earnest good guy. Doing good things, helping people. I liked the James Gunn Superman movie. If I was a kid today, I would have loved that movie. And not for nothing, I think I had my first celebrity crush when I saw Haley Atwell on screen. So, all this to say, yes, I loved this movie as a kid, and so I will look at it with slightly rose-tinted glasses on. That being said, I did rewatch it a couple years ago, and it absolutely still holds up. Like Iron Man 2, this is just a classic, fun, blockbuster movie. You could throw on with your friends, with your family. It's a great, easy watch. It's got a pretty perfect cast. Obviously, everyone knows Chris Evans nails the Boy Scout earnestness of Cap without it being grating or cheesy. Haley Atwell is badass as Peggy. And also, like I mentioned with Jeff Bridges earlier, it's refreshing to see, I don't want to say a real actor, but you know what I mean, doing one of these movies with a genuinely solid performance, as we get from Tommy Lee Jones here. Like now, jokes have been made that doing an MCU movie is kind of like jury duty for people in Hollywood. Like everyone's just gonna pull up and do it once in a while. And you can feel that in some of the performances from the prestigious actors they get now. But here, Tommy Lee Jones is playing an actual character well. He's got funny moments. He's so good in this that my dad, who does not care for superhero movies, will still quote some of his lines sometimes, like he does from actual real movies that he likes. This could also be the childhood nostalgia talking, but honestly, this is also an inspirational movie. I know almost all superhero movies have a positive message, be nice, eat your vegetables, etc. But the whole moral that Cap gets superpowers because he's just a good guy, and the speech Tucci gives him about not being a perfect soldier but being a good man, I don't know man, that shit actually stuck with me throughout the years. As you get older and life gets more complicated, you try to stay true to yourself and be good. I just love that as a message. Tucci, also fantastic here. And man, the Red Skull is honestly the best villain in the whole first phase of the MCU, and one of the best villains of this universe, period. It's a tight race between him and Loki, but just purely visually, what an amazing way of pulling off this villain design. I remember being super freaked out when he tore off his face. It's just a classic supervillain. He's a Nazi, he looks like a monster, he's portrayed by a classic villain portrayer. It's great. I know one of the big complaints about this film is that it's sort of oddly paced. It runs through a lot of its action mostly in one big montage. I don't really agree. I don't think it's ever boring. I think there are fun action scenes throughout, while the film still gives us time to get to know and like these characters. Yeah, it has some cliches in the story, and especially towards the end, it's a bit more predictable. A bit like the first Iron Man. It is very superhero movie towards the end. But you know, it's a superhero movie. What are you gonna do? One complaint I do have, visually, I don't think this is the prettiest looking movie. There is some CGI that is a little video game looking. Not even that it's rubbery or anything, but just like proportionally, these massive tanks with a smaller Captain America, there's just something weird looking about the shot. And the whole sepia tone aesthetic of a lot of the film does help to bring us into that 1940s world, but also just again, isn't the prettiest thing to look at times. And that 1940s world does feel a little artificial in some scenes, like it does feel a bit like a movie set, but also in a comic book movie, I don't really mind that. Like, it's Captain America, it's not fucking Anora, it doesn't have to feel hyper-realistic. And on the 1940s stuff, I really do love the little stylistic bits that add to that setting, like the Captain America song and the cheesy old-school costume. Look, this movie kicks ass, man, and it still holds up. Granted, it doesn't do a lot that exceptionally. If you view this just as a normal mid-tier superhero movie, I can understand that, but I do think it has a lot going for it. It's an entertaining, fun watch. I really like the main character. I loved it as a kid. So that's that. Good-ass movie. And finally, this phase of course culminated with all of these characters coming together for an unprecedented team-up in 2012's The Avengers. Now, if you thought I had rose-tinted glasses for some of these other films, this takes it to a whole nother level. This movie remains to this day as the most fun I've ever had in a cinema. It's a big part of why I got so into superhero movies for a while. It's a big part of why I ultimately started this channel. If you got to have that experience of being 10 years old in 2012, seeing this movie in the cinema, it was fucking awesome. There's no two ways about it. You can argue all day that it's not on the level of actual cinematic quality of something like a Star Wars or an Indiana Jones or Lord of the Rings, and honestly, yeah, I think you're right. But in terms of how people from different generations talk about getting to see those movies in the cinema at that young age, and it was awesome and a transformative experience, and it was before all that became so iconic, this was that for me. This was my ultimate cinema experience. I genuinely remember it so vividly. The fact that everyone was laughing, all the quips were funny, a superhero movie not taking itself too seriously, that was still relatively novel at the time, and it was just such a good vibe in there, and it was just genuinely funny. And B, that final battle was like the single coolest thing I'd ever seen. I have never left the cinema as giddy as I did after that movie. So first and foremost, that's what I gotta say. For its target demographic, children to teens, I legitimately don't think you could have made a more perfect movie. Now, looking back on it all these years later, a little more objectively, are there some issues I have with it? Yeah. For one, compared to even a lot of these other movies, it does look a little goofy. As a kid, I really liked how colorful and cartoonish it was, and I definitely prefer this to the gray, bleh visual style that later MCU stuff adopted. But there is something about the lighting, the costumes, the way it's shot, that does give it a tiny bit of that, like, Disney Channel movie aesthetic visually. I'm also not huge on how they did my guy Captain America in this movie. Back in 2012, I was in the trenches on the playground, having to defend Captain America as the best Avenger to my friends. But yeah, now looking back, man, they made him such a bitch in this movie. His costume is not very flattering, his, I'm gonna assume, wig doesn't do him any favors, and he's just kind of a whiny buzzkill. I'm glad very shortly after this we got back to properly representing my goat. And yeah, look, is it gonna be as funny as it was in 2012 when I was 10 years old, now in 2025 when I'm 23? No, probably not. But besides these little things, I still think this movie is a ton of fun. Again, the MCU's style of humor has become factory processed, insert quip here, now, but that started because these movies were originally genuinely funny, at least in my opinion, and the opinion of the general moviegoer, if I dare say so. The characters' quipping wasn't just like plugged in automatically, it felt natural and like something people thought about and put effort into to make it funny, and that's the reason it became the signature style, because it was funny to start with. These characters interacting was not only super cool conceptually, solo movies building up to a team up, so you already have attachments to these characters, and it's interesting to see them cross over, but they generally did a good job of finding the best parts of these characters' personalities to bounce off of each other. Loki totally steals the show as the villain. He's way better here than in Thor. In Thor, he's solid, if not a little forgettable. Here, he ratchets up the smirking, cackling, villainous king performance, and it's a ton of fun to watch. Him trading barbs with Tony Stark became so iconic because it was such a fun scene. Every character gets fun moments and cool bits of action. For how many characters are in this, it's balanced quite well. Again, Cap gets kind of screwed, but he still gets a few moments. Phil Coulson dying was actually shocking back in 2012, at least to me. And Loki made 10-year-old me tear up. Like, sitting in the cinema, I took it personally that Loki killed Phil Coulson. Bro, that's Phil Coulson, man. He was such a chill guy. There isn't really much more to say about it besides it's a fun-ass event movie. And to that point, it balances event and movie better than later entries, I feel. This was an event, but unlike something like Endgame or No Way Home, in my opinion, it still stands completely alone as a fun movie. Those movies were like going on a ride. It was a lot of fun, but it was more about the dopamine of cameos and payoffs and all that, and less about the story. Maybe that's a bit harsh on Endgame, because that was the big finale, so that's kind of forgivable. But No Way Home, especially for me, I've had no interest in rewatching that movie. Outside of the fun crossover aspect of it, I don't think there's very much to it. This, I think, is quite rewatchable. It is a movie, even though it was also an event. And yeah, really, I think it is the Star Wars, the Jurassic Park, the Lord of the Rings for the kids/teens of the 2010s. That cinema experience that, again, regardless of if the actual movie stacks up to those others, will stick with you for the rest of your life. And you'll be telling your grandkids, yeah, I saw the Avengers in the cinema. At least that's what I feel like it is for me. And to this day, I still think it's a good-ass time. So those were my benefit of hindsight reviews of the Phase 1 MCU movies. Honestly, looking back, pretty great stuff. In the rush of how big and exciting the MCU was getting leading up to Infinity War and Endgame, it was easy to look back and think of these movies as kind of quaint. But now in the post-Endgame era, I think it's easy to appreciate how solid of a foundation these movies laid for the rest of this universe to be built on. Remember, the mainstream public didn't really know much or care much about these Marvel characters when this started. They were the leftovers after Spider-Man, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four. So to build this universe into something, they just had to make fun, good blockbusters. And that they did. And while the culmination in the Avengers may have, in the long run, taught Hollywood the wrong lesson, that all we want is novelty, crossover, cameo slop, and characters who quip, for what it actually was, man, was it good. And like I said, to be a 10-year-old superhero fan seeing the Avengers in the cinema, it doesn't get much better than that. And I'm grateful I got to have that experience. So that was Phase 1. I'll be back over the next few months doing Phases 2 through 5 in the lead up to Doomsday coming out in December. So stick around for that and other videos, if you can believe that. But what do you think of these movies? And what's it like to look back on them with a 2025 perspective? Let me know all of your thoughts down below in the comments. While you're at it, be sure to like this video, check out my movie podcast, The Poorly Planned Podcast, my Letterboxd at RealBHLHudson, my Instagram at BHL_Hudson, and subscribe for more videos like the one you just watched. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.